This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn to part two of our special, an extended interview with Glenn Greenwald, author of the new book, No Place to Hide, Edward Snowden, the NSA, and the U.S. Surveillance State. 4 weeks ago, Glenn Greenwald returned to the United States for the first time since breaking the Snowden story. He and filmmaker Laura Poitras flew in from Berlin to accept the George Polk Award. Days later, the Pulitzer Prize was given to The Guardian and Washington Post for their coverage of the Snowden leaks. Former NSA Director General Keith Alexander criticized the Pulitzer Prize Committee. He said, quote, "I'm greatly disappointed that we've rewarded those who have put so many lives at risk." I asked Glenn Greenwald to respond.
You know, first of all, I mean, as a journalist, I consider it sort of an additional prize that somebody like Keith Alexander is so angry at the journalism I'm doing that he's willing to make those things up in order to discredit it. I mean, the idea of a journalist is that you ought to be adversarial to people like Keith Alexander, and I would be a lot more worried if he liked the reporting that we did and praised it than I am that he's saying things like that. But the thing that I think is so important to realize is, you know, if you go back 40 years and look at what was said about Daniel Ellsberg, who most people across the political spectrum now consider to have been heroic and justified and noble in what he did, the same exact things were said about him. In fact, Nixon officials went before Congress and accused him of being a secret Russian spy. They said that he put lives at risk. They said that people were going to die as a result of these disclosures, that he was a traitor, that he was engaged in treason, all of which have been proven to be utter fabrications. And every single whistleblowing event that has happened since then, including the 2005 NSA story in which someone in the Justice Department told the New York Times about that program, the blowing the whistle on Abu Ghraib and the torture program and the rendition program, what WikiLeaks and Chelsea Manning did, the same rhetoric is constantly invoked, which is if you shine a light on what we in political power are doing in a way that we haven't authorized you to do, you're going to have blood on your hands. I mean, there's an obvious irony to being accused by a U.S. general who served in Iraq, of all places, of having blood on your hands or causing the death of innocent people. Nobody could ever surpass Keith Alexander and his fellow generals in their ability to do that. But the claim is made all the time reflexively without any evidence because in reality the only thing that has been harmed by the disclosures is not the lives of innocent people, it's the reputation and credibility of people like Keith Alexander, and so you can understand why they're so interested in demeaning it.
Now I want to ask you about the politics of the Pulitzer Prize. The Pulitzer Prize for Public Service that went to The Guardian and The Washington Post is perhaps the highest Pulitzer Prize. It's the first one named. And clearly you and Laura Poitras led these teams. I mean, you were in the articles that are cited in The Guardian, your name is on one after the next after the next. Right. And Laura Poitras is on both The Guardian website and bylining pieces, as well as The Washington Post, the two newspapers named. But technically, according to the rules of the Pulitzer, you each will have to say you're part of the team that won the Pulitzer, that you can't be called a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, though, of course, here at Democracy Now! We will call you that. But what about the politics of this? Because although the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service usually goes to an institution, it often, even in going to an institution, cites the bravery of a particular reporter in reporting this series of stories. Can you talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any secret about the fact that the journalism that I advocate for and engage in is controversial among a large clutch of what I would call establishment journalists. I talked about before there being these unwritten set of rules that govern how you're supposed to speak and what you're supposed to do that I consciously reject and set out to violate because I think they're corrupting. And I've been a very vociferous critic of how the establishment media in the United States conducts itself, and that's created a lot of animosity even before the Edward Snowden story. And so the people who compose this committee are the targets of that criticism and also the targets of the reporting, the way I've tried to do the journalism. So it's certainly understandable, and we've gotten reports that there was some effort on the committee to make sure that, you know, my name and Laura's name didn't sully their wonderful brand. hand. But at the same time, I mean, the way I really look at it is the prize that I'm glad that was awarded. In part because I think some of the best reporting that has been done in history, including the Washington Post investigation of Watergate and the New York Times publication of the Pentagon Papers, won that prize. And I do think, what we tried to do was do the reporting in the public service. There's certainly been no shortage of individual accolades and honors that Laura and I and even Edward Snowden have received. I feel like we've gotten our due credit and much, much more. And ultimately, it really is true, and I think this has been a little bit obscured, is that we weren't actually out there alone. The Guardian did put its 190-year reputation on the line. We didn't always agree on everything, but for the most part, they did the story very fearlessly and very aggressively. There were teams of editors working on all of our stories. There were other reporters who were very brave and who did great reporting. And I think they deserved the award institutionally, and I think it's obvious that a lot of the reporting that was won was reporting that I did, but they definitely deserve that recognition as well. And I mean, I definitely overall am thrilled with the way the prize was awarded, even though I know there were these internal conflicts that I think are to be expected.
Does it also go to the issue of old media and new media?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, for example, the way the Washington Post did its reporting, not only did they not send anybody to Hong Kong, which created a big rift between them and their source, but they published, I think, one story in the first several weeks, because I think that those were the kinds of rules. I mean, Bart Gellman is a great reporter, but the editors of the Washington Post are very much old style, old media, pro-government journalists, the kind who have essentially made journalism in the U.S. neutered and impotent and obsolete.